Do you think Russia has repeated these kinds of provocations at the borders with Ukraine?
It's the fourth time in 10 days, so it's becoming a habit. The first time was in Lithuania. It went a bit under the radar. We didn't talk about it much. An armed drone fell on a military base in a training camp in Lithuania. The Lithuanians suggested protecting us, but we ignored it. Then, with the Poles in the crowd, it all started again. A week before, there were already 2 in Poland. 2 returned to Romania. 1 was detected and tracked. It's always surprising. 2 hunters escorted him until he fell on his own, just following them and not shooting at them. I believe that's already a strategic and doctrinal mistake. Yes, the Russians are making increasingly organized, deliberate incursions. AKLET is a database tracking armed conflicts. Since the conflict began, it has recorded 50 incursions. Poland and...
No one reacted. No one...
reacted. Poland has over a dozen, including fighter jets and helicopters, some from Belarus. De-escalation systematically by never reacting. This is where we are now, having 19 drones at once and realizing we can't handle it.
What you're saying tonight is striking? So was there a lack of firmness from NATO countries regarding what happened? Once again tonight we see this drone that violated Romanian airspace. Why react now? What happened tonight that would make NATO countries react more? Absolutely nothing. And
I want to say, in 2013, just to go back, even countries that are not in NATO, like Sweden at the time, 2 strategic bombers escorted by 4 fighters made a simulated attack run on a Swedish airbase, violating Swedish airspace. They left in 2013, signaling to the Russians we wouldn't act. The Turks did the same in 2015. When it happened to them, in 8 seconds they shot down a plane. Afterward, the Turks never had another airspace violation because they showed firmness. The Europeans, since we never even dared to intercept the missiles that violated our airspace to attack Ukraine from behind, since Ukrainian radars face Russia. So if attacks come from Poland or Romania, they won't see them. And so, even when they pass through our airspace, we forbid ourselves from intercepting them. It's unacceptable. For the first time, we allowed ourselves to shoot down drones. This should have been done over 10 years ago, when the Russians began violating our airspace. Now, maybe it's time to go a little bit further. We shouldn't just intercept once they're in our territory, but establish a 10, 20 or 50-kilometer warning zone for interception. We're going to
discuss the solutions we can access. But Xavier Teitelman, why did this drone violate Romanian airspace tonight? Poland has also gone on maximum alert because
they're neighboring countries and very close. Once they enter one, they might move into another. Let's check the map.
To really look at the borders, but continue. Also, it appears those
who reached Romania via the Black Sea. We know that in the past, these drones that came through the Black Sea zigzagged and arrived via Moldova. They advanced along the border, entered Ukraine from the south and attacked after violating Romanian airspace. So the Polish once again now are on high alert. As soon as drones approach within 100 or 150 kilometers of their border, they will go on alert. That means that the planes stationed there, like the Rafales, for example, are performing what we call operational readiness. Just like when we're in France, within 10 minutes you press a button for a plane that hasn't responded, possibly a lost private plane with a broken radio. We take off in less than 10 minutes. And so this practice of being able to go out and face the threat, being able to take off very, very quickly, that's what they did tonight. Obviously, when facing drones, once again, which costs next to nothing compared to the cost of our system. Let's look at the trajectory of this.
That happened 3 days ago. We tried to reprogram the trajectory again to see what it looked like. When we see these images, when we see the incursion into Polish airspace, can we say with certainty that it was intentional? You know drones so well, there's no doubt for
several reasons. First, these drones found in Poland were modified to reach the country. First, there was an extra fuel tank. The Gerbera only has 1 tank at the back. We saw in the debris, there was a second tank at the front. So it's to go further. So logically, it's not just to hit Poland. Since July, Ukrainians have been recovering drones, dismantling them, and finding SIM cards inside. The SIM cards enable remote control, and they locate Lithuanian and Polish ones. The Russians don't accidentally put Polish SIM cards in to regain control of the drone. Once it reaches the other side of France, it can be operated from there.
Ukraine or from Russia with SIM cards from other countries. The Polish SIM card once...
If it connects to the Polish phone network, Russia could regain control. That's exactly what the Ukrainians did when they carried out Operation Spiderweb with their Ukrainian drones. But since they had Russian SIM cards, they were able to track all those strategic bombers at the time. The Russians are copying this method by using Polish SIM cards, so it can't be a mistake. Looking at this trajectory, there's no doubt there are multiple entry routes simultaneously. The drone that's all the way up north there, actually, it's going to keep going. It's going to go through Belarus and it's going to enter through Belarus, because there are also some who tell us, no, but actually, it's because there was electronic warfare. They were jammed by Ukrainians. How could Ukrainians jam drones over Belarusian airspace? Clearly, this is all organized. Notice where they're headed. Regardless of where they entered, they all end up regrouping in nearly the same spot. Their configuration, trajectory, and mission prep were clear and intentional, yet NATO claims their mission
to intercept those drones was a success. Listen, it was a total success. I
think that the operation of interception of drones, our Dutch F-35S and defense weapons played a key role in this success. In my view, the scale and incursion of the other day was... This is clearly more significant than before. We need more resources for this operation. I saw you. Raise your eyebrows.
However, there was still a problem with the anti-air defense. There's already an issue.
Detection. They announced 19 drones. At first, that means we detected 19. Now we know there were 27 because we found 27 wrecks. So already we weren't able to detect all of them. First, Ukrainians have much more efficient, low-cost sensor networks. This includes not only radars, but also ground microphones that offer reliable coverage. It's passive, undetectable, and highly effective. Then, once they were in the airspace, only 4 were intercepted, only 4 were destroyed, because obviously with our methods, which are those of a country that has prepared for a high-intensity war, we have only fighter jets or helicopters, so we must use missiles or cannons. The Ukrainians, on their side, they have hundreds, and I spent nights with those people. Hundreds of pickup trucks with cannons, big machine guns on the roof, or kinds of radars linked to the cannons. It costs nothing. Or of course, there are drones, drone interceptors, but like us, we don't have that. We're pleased to have sent planes costing $42,000 per flight hour, the F-35 to fire a missile that costs $1.2 million to hit a drone that's worth $10,000. So actually, that's the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. We can do fisheries control with a nuclear aircraft carrier. It's very effective, but in terms of the ratio between cost and effectiveness, that's efficiency. We have an efficiency that is ridiculous. And above all, we don't have the possibility to sustain it in the long term. Our missiles are costly and slow to make. While Russians now produce 500 Shahed kamikaze drones daily, those weren't Shahed drones, they were smaller, cheaper ones with just 3 kilos of explosives. We can already see its effect on the house's roof. But what if they send 500 or 800 drones and Ukraine intercepts just 10%? What if 300 of them landed in Poland, each with 90 kilos of explosives? That would be catastrophic. We're unsure how to handle this. What should we do? So, possibility of
having a drone barrier. Listen to what the Polish are saying. We will also cooperate closely with Ukraine.
In terms of anti-drone systems, we are currently working on the best models, and Ukrainians are the best in the field. They have proven themselves on the field in building an anti-drone barrier that is just as effective. We have already scheduled the hours to do this as soon as possible, to discuss concretely and share experiences. How does a drone barrier work specifically for Ukraine?
So generally speaking, the Ukrainians, they have
added more layers. We're mostly discussing costly missiles. They don't use them against drones, but to intercept hypersonic missiles, ballistic missiles, Patriots, and similar threats. They're never used for small drones like that, so they also have drones that intercept other drones. They've greatly developed it since summer 2024, after seeing the number of unintercepted drones multiply. Exactly, with missiles that are very expensive. See, there are different categories. I brought one back. So these are first-person view kamikaze drones. First-person view kamikaze drones are used massively for tanks and so on. We've seen a lot of them, and actually they're going to put 4 of these drones under a big carrier drone. They're going to go up to 3,000 meters altitude, and once they're at 3,000 meters altitude, they're going to drop these drones one by one. They know from their radar and sensors that a Russian drone with a missile is approaching. And that drone, they're going to pilot it all the way to impact. And that's the second generation of these drones. There's artificial intelligence. You can't see it because it's small, but it has a Raspberry Pi chip. There's an extra chip here with a recognition database to do aerial combat by collision, like during World War II between the Soviets and the Germans. But with explosives.
It carries about 1.5 kilo.
And 3 kg of explosives, depending on the model. This now costs 800 euros and lets Ukrainians intercept 90% of kamikaze drones. The 19 drones, 25 drones that flew over Poland were drones that were not intercepted by Ukraine. The Russians intentionally stayed away from defended areas like cities and nuclear power plants. Today, Ukrainians, I'm in touch with these drone manufacturers, could instantly produce 50% more drones. On top of that, their factories are operating at 60-70% capacity because the Ukrainian government lacks funds to order engines, cameras, and artificial intelligence systems. We, on the other hand, could decide tomorrow to buy from the Ukrainians. Come on, increase your production by 50% for us to protect ourselves. And I want to say, let's protect the Ukrainians better, because in the end, they're acting as a filter. It's Ukraine that's protecting NATO today. How do you explain that these orders weren't made?
Well, I think there are a lot of administrative issues. I
spoke once with some administrative staff. They told me, oh, but do you realize you have to change this document, etc. And I told him, come to the trenches with me. You'll find a solution faster. Today, purchasing methods, including those of the Ministry of the Armed Forces, are not unique to France. Identify a need, express it, and define new doctrines. Some manufacturers will respond. A call for tenders may last 6 months, possibly longer, and will eventually buy in small quantities. Except that as a result, this process, which takes 2 to 3 years, means that today, the drones that are industrialized in France more or less meet the needs, which were true 2 or 3 years ago. In Ukraine, we don't have the speed that's necessary to face the Russians. What we're going to produce today, and the Ukrainians say it themselves, they can't stockpile. If they make a stockpile of drones in 3 months, it's outdated. We've been asked to use specifications that are 2 years old, which sometimes don't fit current realities. What about the response implemented
by NATO, this Operation Sentinel of the East? What will it involve? Listen to the words of NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. And today, General Greenkiewicz and I are here
to announce that the
NATO is starting Operation Sentinel East to reinforce our eastern flank. Military activity will start soon and mobilize various resources.
Allies
like Denmark, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and others. In addition to more traditional military capabilities, this initiative will also include elements aimed at addressing specific related challenges. The use of drones, French and German aircraft to fight against Russian drones.
Is
that the right answer, considering what we just discussed? If we can't have the very low cost and very effective one, we go with the...
Not at all low cost, but still relatively effective. That should be said too. The Ukrainians, some of their drones, they intercept them with helicopters using cannons, with fighter jets using cannons. They don't use their fighter jets to shoot at missiles. For example, I was with Ukrainian fighter jet crews in August. With every takeoff of a French Mirage 2000 that they've been given, they intercept 2 to 3 of these drones. They use the cannon instead, saving on missiles that cost €1 million each. The advantage is that increasing the number of fighter jets allows each to shoot down 2 or 3 drones. That saves us from using SOLR or RR missiles, which are infinitely more expensive. So we need to increase the number of fighter jets. Poland might not have enough of them. And in any case, there's also a message being sent to Russia saying, look, we're standing together. 5 or 6 countries on Europe's eastern borders can now intercept what you're sending Poland. But you say we can do better and cheaper, of course, but we...
prevent ourselves from improving and saving money.
We don't buy from the Ukrainians the production they make today, which they could do in greater quantity, and which evolves daily with near-weekly updates to their mission software, etc. We'll always face high economic costs for efficiency lower than what Ukrainians can achieve. Absolutely. Again, strengthening Ukrainian air defense by enabling more drone production. First of all, so that they can intercept many more of them at home. That's our first line of protection. We really need to realize that. The Ukrainians, now that the Russians are deciding more and more often to violate our airspace, it's the Ukrainians who are protecting us. But in fact, do we need more troops on
the eastern flank of Europe? We know that for drones, we need drone operators, people who can pilot them. We know that in France, it's the army that handles French drones. Is there a difference in assessment here? We know that the Germans, for example, wanted to increase their troops Within NATO, on Eastern Europe's eastern edge, is there a gap between countries? It depends on the front. The reality is, with the Baltic countries like Lithuania and Estonia,
more ground troops are needed because these countries border Russia or Belarus. So, when Germany says it wants to put 2 permanent brigades in those countries, yes, we need a ground army that is massive, strong, and capable of taking hits. A shock could come in 2 to 3 years if the Russians decide to attack these areas again. In the south, if we're on the side of Poland or Romania, these are areas that are not directly in confrontation. So, over there, we would tend to strengthen air defense. That's why France is present on site. With ground troops, Mamba Sante defense batteries, and now our fighter jets. Our fighter jets are already in the northern area, around the Baltic region. So in the air and naval dimensions, we are already in confrontation with the Russians. On the ground, we are positioning ourselves especially in the Baltic countries, but we have to be ready to ramp up our presence significantly. And today, our prospects for increasing our strength with the Germans and all our allies are still strong. But it's not at the level of what the Russians are preparing for us. If Russia and Ukraine agree to a ceasefire tomorrow, Russia, in 3 years, it will have 6,000 armored vehicles, 20,000 cruise missiles, and 1.2 million men. We're deploying 2 brigades in the Baltic states. We must be clear, we need to do much more than today, as there's an urgent need for air defense. We've been talking for 3 years, and for 3 years I've been saying that the Ukrainians are ahead and that we need to do this. I hope we can tell the Ukrainians, produce 1,000 drones a day for us, and that would really be an answer. Is it true that our Sante Mamba air defense systems are not suited to
drone swarms, for example? They are extraordinarily effective against the systems that are very, very expensive and that the Russians fire.
For example, Russians launch Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, but the French Mamba system can intercept them. Russians also fire ballistic missiles. The Aster 30B1 NT can intercept ballistic missiles. So theoretically, a current Aster 30 missile, which can intercept a hypersonic fighter jet, can intercept a drone. But are we going to waste €2 million munitions to shoot down drones that cost 10,000, while the Ukrainians could sell us systems that cost €800? So that's really a question. It's very effective, but it's not efficient due to a poor cost-to-effectiveness ratio. Can we still say with conviction tonight that Europe could not cope with the...
Similar to Ukraine, the Russians claim the drones can't reach that far. Listen. No target was marked on Polish territory. The maximum range of the drones used in this strike did not
exceed 700 kilometers, which makes it physically impossible for them to reach Polish territory. In reality, how far can drones go? For example, a Shahed can go more than 2,000 kilometers
of range, and they zigzag over the
Ukrainian sky to avoid cities and reach deep into Ukrainian territory. And here, what he's saying is that the Gerbera drone, which is the one that was massively sent to Poland, can't go any further. That's true, except that, as I was saying earlier, we can see at the front, there's a second tank. You can see there's some kind of extra bottle that was added. It was confirmed to be a second tank, so yes, he's right. The drone in its normal version can't reach Poland. The drone, as they've modified it, is made to go all the way to Poland, even farther. For now, no, but there are drones that will go much farther.
Shahed, the improved version.
The Shahed has a 2,500 kilometers range. The KH-101 missile can reach France from Russia. So we're talking about missiles that have a very, very long range anyway. And I'm not even talking about ballistic missiles that can reach the other side of the Atlantic. We're discussing equipment with extremely long range. Let me remind you, for example, that a KH-55 missile went unnoticed again at the end of 2022. A Russian KH-55 missile crossed Ukraine and went 500 kilometers into Poland. They tracked it, they watched it fall, and they did nothing afterwards. If I'm asking you this question, it's because we're going to listen to the words of the representative of Ukraine at
the United Nations. And on this point, he was very firm. In fact, what is currently happening in Poland could also happen in other European capitals. Listen, it was a conscious, deliberate decision. It was a deliberate decision by Russia to cross the
new red line and test
our patience and that of the international community. Russia made a deliberate choice to escalate this war. And if this escalation goes unanswered,
decisive
Russia won't stop Poland. Tomorrow it could be
drones or even
missiles that could strike Berlin, Paris, or London. And after
tomorrow. who
Who knows, something could accidentally cross the Atlantic. Can we say firmly tonight that Russia will stop at Poland and Romania? So
would like
Her to stop right now and not even at Ukraine. But can we
say it? Obviously not, since day after day they prove that they want to violate our airspace. There, I still think they're exaggerating the situation a little bit, because in reality, yes. These drones have the capability to fly as far as France, for example. The KH-101 cruise missiles, as I was saying, the Shahed, can also fly as far as France. But a few countries remain in between. The issue is that the Russians have created a version of the Shahed that can be launched from. A civilian container passes off France's coast, opens and launches Shahed kamikaze drones. It was revealed last October because there were data leaks from the Russian army. The Russians have been training since 2013 to bomb targets in Western Europe, especially in France and Great Britain. Normally, in a Russian attack plan on the Baltic countries, the goal is to prevent us from coming to reinforce the Baltic countries. That means hitting our road, rail and electrical infrastructures, our airports, and so for that they don't need to shoot. From Russia, they could launch hundreds of Shahed missiles from the Atlantic right next to us. Because once again, we'll be facing the wrong way. I hope we develop effective ways to intercept them, not just rely on costly missiles. Since you say there are windy countries, as we've clearly seen in the case of Poland, our
air defense failed even for detection? What happens if these drones reach European capitals without being detected? Yes, we need to massively take inspiration from what's working in Ukraine, like I said earlier, not necessarily with systems.
acoustic sensor networks let us detect them immediately once they're over our territory, avoiding costly alternatives. Have units that are able to intercept them, as we've said with anti-drone drones, once again, that's what the Ukrainians are doing. We also need to strengthen and restore our cannon capabilities. We no longer have anti-aircraft cannons, though our missiles work well. Dozens of units across the territory, like the Ukrainians use, intercept threats with large cannons. This is definitely under consideration. France needs to regain this ability to destroy with cannons, because obviously it costs much less without needing to launch fighter jets or use those missiles. I hope that never happens. A possible attack by the Russians, but we have to prepare for it so that it doesn't happen again. Are we really paranoid about a Russian attack? The maneuvers with Zapad 2025, we have to admit, Zapad, which means
West in Russian. It's a Russian exercise that takes place every 4 years, which greatly worries European countries, especially since Russia uses Belarus as a rear base. Is there a risk that the Russians will rely on this operation? To go further, let's look at the map of this Zapad exercise, an exercise that started just a few days ago. Is there really a possibility to do more? We know that in 2021, sadly, Russian soldiers stationed in Belarus for exercises were used to invade Ukraine. Are we really in a worst-case scenario here, or is this reality? Xavier Teitelman, Georgia, Ukraine. Previous exercises allowed troops to be deployed under the pretense, don't worry, it's just...
It was called just an exercise before the invasions. Here, they're doing the same with Belarus, particularly at the border with Lithuania, which is NATO's main weak point. In that area, the Russians are tied up on the Ukrainian front. They were only able to send 2,000 men to Belarus, and Belarus could only deploy 8,000 men for the exercise. That means in reality, there are only 10,000 men in that area, so we're not worried. But on the other hand, what does that mean for the Ukrainians? The Ukrainians? They must relocate 8,000 to 10,000 men from other front areas to just below Belarus, because precisely they can't end up with a Russian army on the other side. So even if it's nothing from our point of view, and the Poles were able to mobilize 40,000 men, Ukrainians still fear having so many Russians nearby. Why not attack Kiev from behind? There was also a fear about the Suwałki corridor, a corridor that allows passage between Belarus and the Kaliningrad enclave. Let's look at this.
Map, the weak point of NATO, this Suwałki corridor. We can see clearly it allows the Russians to have a corridor between Belarus and the Kaliningrad enclave, so that they can very clearly go from Belarus to this enclave that belongs to Russia. Should the Suwałki corridor really be closed? Yes. So, if it becomes a threat, if this area, the Russians are trying to militarize it, if they are clearly trying to increase the amount of force that is in the
area, we have to prepare ourselves and say, we won't accept tanks passing through there on a highway or anywhere else, so we'll close it off in anticipation. that seems completely logical and relevant if the Russians are building up forces on the other side. Now, generally speaking, you also need to have brigades. And you also need to have forces allied with the Poles in the south, Lithuanians in the north, and supported by Germans to counter this attack. That's why NATO said if there's an attack in the Kaliningrad area, they'll invade Kaliningrad. There is still a NATO response. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of men who are still present in the area. Poland is easy to... No, it won't be easy. We have to do everything to make sure that never happens, because if it does, we're talking about tens and...
Hundreds of...
thousands of deaths. If we have an open war between Russia, Poland, NATO, all those countries in the area, we will be directly involved. So we have to do everything we can to help Ukraine today so that it doesn't spill over. To prevent Russia from rearming, sanctions shouldn't be lifted after a ceasefire. Allowing them to rearm without strengthening our forces creates a real risk. Once again, I remind you of Patrushev at the end of last year, Putin's top advisor, who keeps telling us that the future of the Baltic countries is to return to the Russian fold. Just like during the time of the Russian Empire, he's not even talking about the Soviet Union, it's the time of the Russian Empire. Same thing for Georgia, same thing for Moldova. So we have to be prepared because they are making it very clear. Tonight, the Americans' message, including Marco Rubio's, is likely reassuring. This shouldn't have happened. I think no one...
is happy to see this happen? Did you see NATO respond appropriately? We don't want...
We believe this is an unacceptable and dangerous development that should not happen again. I think it will take a few more days for everyone to fully understand. The drones were launched intentionally, there's no doubt about that. The question is whether the drones specifically targeted Poland. If that's the case, if the evidence leads us to that conclusion, then it would obviously be a major escalation. And also at the United Nations, those words saying that they will defend every inch of NATO, the United States backs its NATO allies amid these alarming violations.
Of airspace. The United States is consulting with Poland and its other NATO allies.
Under Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty, and rest assured that we will defend every
square inch
of NATO territory. Thank you. Do you believe them? But, okay, it's unacceptable, it's intolerable. We've said it 30 times.
we see
Intolerable, unacceptable things, and yet we're still at the same point.
Does that...
I mean, if we defend every square inch of NATO, does that mean if another Russian plane enters our airspace, we should shoot it down like Turkey did in 2015, just as Russians would shoot down a European plane or drone crossing into their territory? We can imagine Warsaw's airspace was closed to civilians. If there were French drones attacking Moscow, flying over Moscow, and the airports had to be closed, what would the Russian response be? They'd shoot down our drones without hesitation. What could the Americans do in that scenario? First, reassure by ensuring their presence in case of war, since that's not guaranteed today.
Despite Article 5, Trump is not clearly committed.
That he would be there to help us if there was an open war. We're trying to detox from the American drug, which is believing that they'll have our backs. We're building up our strength, but until our power is strong enough, we need to be sure that the Americans will really be there. Then, more resources. When we talk about providing resources, it means that they too could put fighter jets on the European borders. Today, that's not really the case yet. They're actually pulling their ground forces back from the European front. There aren't enough American fighter jets to match their strength. The United States has overwhelming power with 3,000 fighter jets. We're talking about...
The same force used by the United States and Spain.
They could obviously do much more. Then there's the matter of better supporting Ukraine. And they have the economic and material means. They could provide systems. Whenever airspace is violated, they can claim to provide 15,000 or 50,000 shells or cruise missiles. If each NATO airspace violation resulted in Russia getting 100 long-range cruise missiles on its territory, I'm sure they'd think twice before doing it again. And finally, one last thing, it's to agree to protect the skies of Europe with a margin, by intercepting anything passing 100 to 150 kilometers beyond Poland's and Romania's borders. That's Sky Shield, that's the famous movement that's on the rise. Because if we manage to position ourselves upstream, obviously fewer drones will reach our territory. The French opposed the European Sky Shield initiative since it would require buying from the United States and Israel. So Sky Shield is really a movement to protect the sky,
Not about specific equipment. That means if France decides tomorrow to protect Odessa by deploying defense systems on...
Odessa, and by having Mamba systems. Sante, Iriste, we have them, but we don't want to give them anymore. That's really something important. The French army has equipment coming back from foreign operations we had in Jordan, that we have in the Emirates, and that we've withdrawn from our foreign operations. When we left Mali, for example, we kept equipment we didn't want to discard, which is ready for foreign operations. And when I talk about it off the record, with soldiers doing their job, protecting civilians, like we did in the Balkans, like we did in Yugoslavia, intercepting missiles like we did for Israel by intercepting Iranian missiles is legitimate. We protect civilians. It's our mission to save people. That's still why armies get involved. And today, there is no direct conflict with Russia, since it's only to intercept missiles and drones that are far away in the rear. So that's how it is today. Today, there is political will. The former number one of the French artillery army signed this op-ed. This isn't just utopian. The president of the Foreign Affairs Defense Committee agrees. I think we'll pursue it. Invade Ukraine to restore Greater Russia almost 35 years after the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics fell. I think the president of the Foreign Affairs Defense Committee and I will go for it.
Invade Ukraine to restore Greater Russia almost 35 years after the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics' fall.